Ever feel like you're juggling a million things at once, like spinning plates? But instead of plates, it's apps, and they all need something different.
And they're all about to fall and crash.
Exactly. That's where Kubernetes swoops in, right? Like, hey, let me handle this chaos for you.
It's like the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all those applications play together in perfect harmony.
Okay, I like where we're going with this. But before we get too metaphorical, let's ground this for folks who might be new to the whole Kubernetes world. What does it actually do? Why is it such a game changer?
You got it. In the simplest terms, Kubernetes manages your software applications, taking care of all the behind-the-scenes work so you don't have to, especially when those applications are packaged up neatly in, you guessed it, containers.
Ah, containers. Those seem to be a big part of the conversation these days. For anyone who hasn't quite wrapped their head around them yet, how would you explain what a container is?
Imagine a self-contained box that holds everything your application needs to run. The code, the libraries, all of its dependencies. That's a container. Makes it super portable and easy to deploy anywhere.
Like, here's my app in a box, ready to go wherever, whenever.
Exactly. And Kubernetes takes those containers and orchestrates them, making sure they're deployed correctly, scaled efficiently, and always running smoothly.
So we've got these self-contained apps in boxes, and Kubernetes is making sure those boxes are stacked correctly, transported to the right places,
Making sure they're talking to each other.
and that the whole system keeps humming along.
Got it. Now, I noticed our notes mention pods quite a bit. How do those fit into the picture? Ah, good catch. A pod is basically the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. It's like a group of one or more containers that are always deployed together.
So if the container is the individual box, the pod is...
It's like a container ship carrying multiple containers that work together.
Okay, I'm starting to get the lingo down. We've got our containers bundled into pods, but these apps don't exist in isolation, right? They need to communicate.
You're exactly right, and that's where services come in. Services act as a kind of internal networking layer in Kubernetes, allowing different parts of your application to communicate with each other.
So if pods are like individual apartments in a building, services are.
The phone lines, the intercom system, the mailboxes, all those things that keep the residents connected.
Making sure the right messages get to the right places. Love it. What about data? Where does all that get stored in this whole Kubernetes world?
Excellent question. That's where volumes come in. They provide persistent storage for your applications, even if a pod needs to be restarted or moved.
Ah, so it's not like our app's data is stuck inside a single container or pod. It's got its own dedicated storage space.
Precisely. And that data persists, even if the pod itself goes down for some reason. It's crucial for keeping applications running smoothly.
Resiliency is key, especially in today's world. Okay, last thing before we move on. I keep seeing the term namespaces. What's the deal with those? What do they do?
Namespaces are a way to divide up your Kubernetes cluster, kind of like virtual compartments. You can use them to separate different environments, like development, testing, and production.
So it's like having separate sandboxes within our Kubernetes world, if that makes sense, especially if you're working with different teams or on different versions of an application. Keeps everything nice and organized. Okay, so we've got our containers all packed up in their potheads, services keeping them connected, volumes acting as our trusty storage units, and namespaces to keep everything organized. But like, why is this whole Kubernetes system such a big deal? What are the real game-changing benefits here?
You hit the nail on the head. It's all about making applications more robust, more scalable, more resilient. Think about those apps we rely on every day, the ones that just need to work no matter what. Kubernetes helps make that happen.
Okay, so no more panicked calls to IT because the website crashed. Sign me up. But how does it actually do that? How does Kubernetes make those apps so resilient?
It's all about automation and redundancy. Kubernetes can automatically spin up new instances of your application if needed. Like, let's say one of your pods decides to take an unplanned nap.
Which, let's be real, technology can be a little unpredictable sometimes.
Exactly. So one pod goes down, Kubernetes sees that and is like, no problem, I've got a backup ready to go. It spins up a new pod, and users don't even notice a blip.
It's like having a whole team of invisible stagehands behind the scenes, making sure the show goes on no matter what. I love it.
Exactly. Now imagine your app suddenly goes viral. Everyone's trying to access it at once.
Been there? Had the website crash? Not fun.
Right. Well, with Kubernetes, you can handle those traffic spikes like a champ. It can automatically distribute the load, ensuring no single server gets overwhelmed.
So it's like having a whole orchestra of servers ready to play, and Kubernetes is the conductor, making sure they all come in at the right time.
Perfect analogy. Now here's where it gets even cooler. Remember how we talked about health checks? Well, Kubernetes is constantly monitoring your applications, like a hawk. It's checking to make sure everything is running smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
And if something goes wrong,
It calls the doctor.
pretty much, it can automatically restart the unhealthy pod or even replace it with a healthy copy. And it does all this behind the scenes without you having to lift a finger.
So it's like having a built-in immune system for your apps, constantly fighting off any potential issues.
Exactly. And that's why Kubernetes has become so essential. It brings this level of resilience and scalability that just wasn't possible before. It's a game changer, for sure.
Kubernetes, the invisible superhero of the software world. I'm loving this deep dive. And, as we've been talking about all these amazing things Kubernetes does, it reminds me of something we haven't touched on yet. Our notes mention custom health checks. What's the story there?
Ah, you're really digging into the details. I like it. So yeah, custom health checks. Those are like, think of them as specialized medical tests for your applications.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the standard checkup just isn't enough, right? You need to make sure Kubernetes is looking for the specific things that might indicate a problem with your app.
So if my app relies on a connection to a specific database, I can set up a custom health check just for that.
Precisely. That way, Kubernetes knows to raise a red flag if that connection ever drops, and it can take action immediately. It's all about having that fine-grained control, making sure your applications are always in tip-top shape.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, we can't talk about Kubernetes without mentioning API gateways. They seem to be a pretty essential piece of the puzzle.
They're absolutely crucial, especially when you have multiple services within your application that need to communicate with the outside world.
Yeah.
Think of an API gateway as the grand central station for all those requests.
So it's like the main entrance to our application.
Exactly. It sits in front of all your services, acting as a single entry point for all incoming traffic. This makes things like security, traffic management, and even adding new features much, much easier.
It's like having a receptionist who can direct all the calls to the right department. Makes everything run smoother.
Exactly. And speaking of running things smoothly, let's talk about Minikube for a second. Kubernetes is often used to manage these massive, complex applications.
Which is incredible, but also a little intimidating if you're just getting started, right?
Right. And that's where Minikube comes in. It lets you set up a mini Kubernetes cluster right on your own laptop.
Like a Kubernetes playground. I love it.
It is. It's the perfect way to experiment with Kubernetes, try out different configurations, get comfortable with the concepts before you go deploying anything to a live environment.
So if you're curious about Kubernetes, Minikube is a great place to start.
Absolutely. No huge servers required.
Right.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have managed Kubernetes services.
Right. Because let's be real, not everyone has the time or resources to become a Kubernetes expert and manage their own clusters, right?
Exactly. That's where managed services like Google Kubernetes Engine, or GKE, and Amazon's Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS, come in. These are basically Kubernetes as a service.
So it's like having a dedicated team of Kubernetes experts managing everything for you.
Precisely. They handle all the infrastructure, the scaling, the maintenance, all that complex stuff. And you get to focus on what matters most: building and deploying your applications.
It's a trade-off, of course. You give up a bit of control, but you gain a whole lot of convenience and expertise.
Exactly. It's about choosing the right tool for the job. But here's the thing. Even if you do go with a managed service, understanding the fundamentals of Kubernetes is still incredibly valuable.
Right, because you still need to know how to build the application that's going to run on Kubernetes, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
And you need to understand how Kubernetes works at a basic level to make informed decisions about your infrastructure.
It's like you don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car, but it definitely helps to know a little something about how it works.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the basic building blocks of containers and pods to the power of services, volumes, and namespaces.
We've talked about resilience, scalability, health checks, API gateways, even dipped our toes into the world of Minikube and managed services.
Phew, my brain is officially full. But in a good way. Kubernetes is clearly an incredibly powerful and versatile system. I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot more about it in the years to come.
Oh, absolutely. And who knows what innovations are on the horizon. That's the exciting part, isn't it? There's always something new to learn, always new possibilities to explore.
Exactly. And on that note, we'll wrap things up for today's deep dive. A huge thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey into the world of Kubernetes. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.